Good. All right. I'm assuming everyone is seeing my slide. Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. All right. So we want to welcome everyone to season 7 of Environmental Fridays. Environmental Fridays, it is personal. At the side here, the bottom right, is our QR code to our website. And we also want to let you know that we do have a Facebook group. Um, and basically, all you have to do is go and Google, just go to Google and put in Environmental Fridays Facebook, and it will be the first, I think, actually 2 hits right away at the top. So it's very easy to get to the Facebook group and join us there. And also our YouTube playlist. Again, simply go to Google, put in Environmental Fridays YouTube, Environmental Fridays YouTube, and right at the top, and I think for at least 10, 12, or maybe even more, you will see links to our playlist, to individual videos. So it's very, very easy to get um, to see our um, to join our Facebook group, and to view our episodes. They are all up on YouTube. Yes, we are at the end of November. We just got started with November. It's already done. And so for this season 7, we have 3 more episodes in December. The first one we'll be hearing from Atlanta, Emory University professor, talking about urban gardening and soil contamination. Then we'll switch to Trinidad, where we'll talk about permaculture and regenerative landscaping by Earl, who is an entrepreneur and a pioneer in this area in the Caribbean. And then finally, on the 20th of December, we'll hear from Stephanie, who is associated with Citizens Climate, and she'll give us a brief discussion about her career and how she got into her education background. So those are what we have coming up to close out season 7. Today we have a former student from Andrews University and Andrews University alumni, Christian Campos, will be my co-host today on Environmental Fridays. He is currently a structural engineer with Skies Consulting in Atlanta, Georgia. And he specializes in designing structures for arenas and educational facilities. He got a master's degree in architecture in 2016 from Andrews. And then he went back, he got, I guess, the engineering bug and attended Kennesaw State University. Is that also in Georgia?
Yes, it's in Georgia.
In Georgia. And obtained a bachelor's in civil engineering. So before you introduce Professor Moreno, um, what's the latest project you're working on? What arenas and educational facilities have you worked on recently, or what's coming up?
Well, one of the things that I'm working on right now is a new dorm facility for Georgia Tech in Atlanta.
Really?
Yeah, it's a new dorm for the first year students. It's provided a lot of engineering challenges, but it looks pretty cool. It's going up right now. They're doing construction at the moment. I was just on site last week, and it's going to be cool. I'm excited to see how the product ends up.
What kind of capacity you looking at? How many
Capacity?
persons, yeah, how many persons you think would be able to be in that
Oh, I should probably
a
know that.
big
It's an 8 story tall,
eight
um,
story? Oh, okay.
8 story tall dorm. It's pretty big.
Yeah,
Um,
that's big.
Trying to think how many rooms. I feel like there's like a few hundred students who
Yeah,
can be in there. Yeah.
yeah, I would say so. Okay. All right. Did you, by the way, I'm putting you on the spot here. Did you
Okay.
any green principles?
Well, on our end right now, the only thing we focus on green, at least for where I'm working, is tracking our carbon footprint, tracking how much carbon we're getting from the steel. And that's kind of a new thing that's becoming more of an industry standard. We were just having a conversation about that last week where we're like, we need to start getting on this. We need to start coming up with ways to track this because more and more architects are starting to want that information for their lead for their sustainability.
Mm,
But on our end, not a whole lot. The architect definitely is doing a whole lot of choosing contractors, choosing materials, stuff like that.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
but it's not as heavy on the structural side right now.
Okay, sounds good. Well, it's your turn to introduce your former teacher.
Okay,
Yes.
sure. Well, as we just discussed, Mark Moreno was a professor of mine back in the early 2010s. Um, he received his Bachelor's of Science in Architecture from the University of Texas at Arlington in 1985 and a Master's in Architecture from Harvard University in 1991. He currently teaches at Andrews University as a professor in the architecture program, which is obviously where I know him from. And in 2007, he founded Renaissance Kids, which is a children's summer program designed around teaching architectural concepts in a fun, hands-on environment, while also incorporating community build projects. When I was there, we built a cool enclosure for a trash bin that had stone masonry. I remember it was really cool. Oh, we also did some cool benches for the art museum there. It was a great program. He also co-authored Architecture for Kids, Skill Building Activities for Future Architects with his daughter. Um, I would say Professor Moreno has had a personal hand in my growth, my journey in life, and I want everyone to join me in welcoming him today.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. It's so good to see you. We stay in touch, and it's always a good thing. And I think it's a wonderful thing to see when students take alternative paths to their what would the presumed career of an architect. But and he's done a beautiful job with that. So thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
Let's see. I've got to do a share.
Yep, there it is coming up.
And, okay.
All right, we're seeing it. Very good.
Okay, so to talk about green architecture, I want to talk a little bit about what is architecture first. So architecture can be thought of um, as related to many things, like the architecture of the body, or the architecture of language, or the architecture of music. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about architecture of the built realm, and especially as it relates to construction of roads, so civil engineering, construction of buildings, of course, construction of landscapes, construction of interiors, and even furniture. Further, though, even more broadly, we're going to be talking about the design of streets, neighborhoods, and the idea of whole cities. Even further, architecture is a reflection of us as a species, and that these are areas that I teach in. I teach person environment theory in a class called placemaking, and they're seriously dear to my heart. I think I have to stretch this a little bit more, the viewing screen. 1 second. I got to adjust that. so you can see the whole slide.
Okay.
Okay. So it's a reflection of us as a species. And as humans, we've always needed shelter of one kind or another. But with every step that we take in life, every shovel, every backhoe that we use to dig into the ground, or every piece of dynamite that we use to blow out pieces of the earth, we are making a footprint on the planet. Architecture is one of the fullest reflections of the culture we have today. And it's a full, I mean, it's not the fullest reflection, but it is also a full reflection of cultures throughout time and space. It reflects some of humanity's greatest accomplishments, buildings and monuments made by human hands throughout time. They have stood for hundreds and thousands of years as full testament to what is possible with the human ingenuity and determination. And it should also be noted that some of these masterful pieces of works of art are made on the backs of slaves and serfs. This just anecdotally, we don't have to have the most grand of buildings to understand the culture of a place. This is the former king's palace in Rwanda. I happen to be able to go here, and I'm sharing this. This is a beautiful, beautiful, and wondrous space, that shapes and forms and structures, color, texture, and light. Architecture also records some of the greatest of the world's tragedies. They become etched in our minds, and their memories stand as testament to human failings, individually and collectively, as testaments of heroism and awe also at the same time. These are just a sprinkling of ideas about architecture and the scratch in the surface, so no one can comprehend the fullness of architecture's power. We each find our individual connections with architecture's power, be they subconscious and or conscious. And my hope, though, is that we each find an experiential fullness, in the places that we find ourselves, be it at the Pantheon in Rome, which shapes and literally owns a slice of the sun, I guess figuratively, or a dabbling of light through the trees and window panes of of a family breakfast nook. And while pondering these things, all great architecture wants to live a long and sustained life. But the only way to achieve this is to build better. So today I'm going to be talking to you, thanks to Desmond Murray's invitation, about green architecture. So from here forward, I'm going to be talking about three things. What is green architecture? What is the profession doing to affect a greener environment? And what can you or we do about it? Green architecture, generally speaking, is an approach to building design and construction that focuses on minimizing the negative environmental impact, while creating healthy living spaces. That's a portion that has had to be learned over time, focusing on how we live, not just how the planet is surviving. It aims to create structures that are harmonious and coexist with their surroundings. As stewards of creation, we find that the wonderment of this planet and the life that it holds is infinitely complex. The more we ask, the more we learn, the more we have to, the more questions we ask, the more questions we get. And sustainability as a concept, though, has been around for hundreds of years, but the movement that we call the sustainable movement has only been around since around the 60s. and environmentalists have been rightly shouting to us for a long time to return to living more lightly on the planet. But that's easier said than done, because not only is God in the details, the devil's in the details. We know that the planet's future is in peril. We ourselves may not be, meaning that we here today may live out our lifespans just fine. But the planet's future and our species' future is in danger. If our lives were in clear and imminent danger from environmental threats, we might do more to mitigate damages. If we had more voice, let's say we are in places where places are more dangerous to inhabit, but we had more voice, we might be able to have more impact there as well. I show these images here just as there's this thing called gizmo green, that elements, artifacts might be attempting to solve the problems of pollution and climate change and global warming, but these efforts confound us with opacity in a global marketplace of commercial goods, of which we cannot know their full value to the cause. Gizmo green is neither inherently good nor bad. Each device must be evaluated against a host of measures, whether they are fully green or not. As Christian attested, the engineers aren't the ones making all the decisions about what is being built. They're just helping to make sure that they stand forthright and sturdy. It's hard enough, though, to convince the powers that be of the efficacy of these no-brainers like solar power and wind power. This will be a lot easier when fossil fuels are fully depleted. These two high-rises represent interesting attempts to be green in Milan, Italy. They are called Bosco Verticale, which means the vertical forest. And there are two more like them in the Netherlands. They're interesting and they're cool. And they're also hugely expensive. The penthouse I saw being sold for $17 million, but each of the units is well above one and multiple millions of dollars. This kind of building is not equally scalable, uses a lot of concrete, which is a carbon intense product. But while I say this, we should not damn the good while in search for the perfect. So, for instance, this building stands as at least a symbol to a higher purpose that these buildings alone can't deliver on 100%. According to James Kunstler, in his book, The Geography of Nowhere, written in 1993, he says that 80% of everything ever built in America has been built in the last 50 years. And most of it is depressing, brutal, ugly, unhealthy, and spiritually degrading. And I share this book because it was deeply important in helping me to focus in my works. Mind you, that was 30 years ago that he, or 20 years ago that he wrote that book. 30 years ago. Kunstler's quote reminds me of the realities of warfare's impact on the earth. War is depressing, brutal, ugly, unhealthy, and spiritually degrading. The architecture of war, while devastating to human life and non-human life, ravages the earth and the human spirit in profound ways. It is said, I've found this on multiple sites, warfare amounts to 5% of the climate's global emissions. But that's not true. Shamefully, nations, per the Paris Accord or Paris Agreement, don't have to report their full global impact of war. And they're not also reporting, when they do report, they're not reporting on the destruction of embodied energy and reporting on the reconstruction efforts. On the more peaceful side of the equation, but still devastating, the peaceful side of the human construction equation, a staggering 42% of global emissions is made by the built environment. So buildings, operational carbon emissions refers to the ongoing emissions from a building's day-to-day use. Maybe Christian can be calculating that as well. And then the embodied carbon emissions are associated with the production of building materials and the act of construction. What's become personal for me is this. I grew up here. This could be anywhere USA, but it's called sprawl. I grew up in this kind of environment in Arlington, Texas. And it's easily described this way. If you have to drive to get to work, to church, to school, to the store, if you have to drive to get the milk, then you likely live in sprawl. And if the architecture discourages walking and encourages driving, then you likely live in a place that is less socially viable. And if we're driving and not walking, our bodies are less healthy. And if we're driving more, then the planet is less healthy. And the following, again, it's a hyperbolic but sobering statement by James Kunstler. America's evolution, this is a quote, America's evolution from a nation of main streets and coherent communities to a land where every place is like no place in particular, where the cities are dead zones and the countryside is a wasteland of cartoon architecture and parking lots. Notice in this picture, there's only one person visible. And I honestly think that they had to Photoshop this person in here because the likelihood of getting that picture at that time is hard to imagine. And why would anybody want to be there anyway, crossing that street? So this is Florida and a projection it's a 50-year projection outward. So the red zone talks about populated areas, more densely populated areas. And the red in the right side image projects how much farmland and other land will be consumed, if we continue to build in the manner that we're building. So I've seen this analogy before. I think even in Environmental Fridays, the boiling frog is a metaphor that describes how people can become unaware of or unwilling to react to gradual threats. The metaphor is based on the idea that a frog placed in a boiling water will jump out. But if a frog is placed in tepid water that is gradually heated, the frog won't notice and the temperature will rise and the frog will perish. So it's easy to understand, I think, from my own personal experience, it's easy to understand that individuals don't really fully understand the impact of architecture and this kind of architecture. And maybe not even understand their ability to make effective change. My wife and I studied architecture together, and the first time we ever really understood what is a real place was on a trip to Rome. And we walked around thinking, wow, this is real. And when we came back, I became depressed. We both became depressed, living in a place that was so placeless. And the formal 8 years of my education didn't, at that time, from the 80s to early 90s, did not have a full grasp of this either, in architecture, that is. So what is the profession doing? I have to say, I'm hopeful and proud that the profession is stepping up and, finally taking an important position on global warming efforts and climate change. There are a lot of efforts all of which, again, can be evaluated for their efficacies and failures or shortcomings. But a lot of things are being done, and so, for instance, there are studies and practices in renewable energy, studies and practices in promoting greater density, which is more green for living. Density provides for greater opportunities for using mass transit. Greater density provides for opportunities for more walking and greater health of body and social health, I think, as well. This is not to say that living out in, I'll get to this in a bit, but living out in suburbia and living out in rural, I mean, great communities abound in these environments, but there's an amalgam that happens when living collectively, and we can live collectively in small villages as well. But the goal here is to preserve farmland for farming. Accessory dwelling units, encouraging mixed income populations to coexist. That's, architecture has a say in this. Using geothermal wells, pulling energy from the Earth's mass, using solar power, solar energy to generate electricity, using green roofs to absorb rainwater, discourages flooding, and mitigates runoff from oils and chemicals into the streams and oceans and rivers. Architects and engineers are involved in countless understandings of and learnings and teachings about materials, in recycling and using materials that are made from waste. They're using materials that need less energy to produce them, materials that use less water, materials that absorb carbon dioxide, which is a cool thing, and using renewable sources like timber and hemp for rethinking what is concrete. There are organizations that are taking bold steps toward promoting greener living. So LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and is a green building initiative. It's been around for a few decades, and people building buildings can apply to get a certificate, but it's largely expensive. And sometimes when you're chasing the tick marks to check off this thing that I've done, it can stray away from the fullest greenness, for sure. But again, shouldn't be damned. It's a really great program. After LEED came into popularity, Well Building Institute started focusing on the greater impacts of what it means to people's human health and well-being. And so buildings can be certified as well buildings when they've taken into account the quality of the air, the water usage, nourishment, light, fitness, comfort, and the comfort of the mind. Following this, LEED ND, LEED Neighborhood Development, is a plan that seeks to make places more walkable, give places a sense of place, a sense of belonging, social cohesion, and it encourages strategies that conserve resources, the natural landscape, and facilitates connections of cities with the community the surrounding countryside. Exclusionary zoning is something that we have learned, urban designers and architects and civil engineers, has a lot of negative effects. And this image in the right that I've already shown you is an example of exclusionary zoning, where people live over there. This is where commercial lives. This is where commercial buildings are, and this is where civic buildings go. These regulations often serve to maintain property values, but um, don't really preserve the character of traditional neighborhoods. They often can lead to economic and racial segregation. Excuse me. Imagine living on a street like this. Steve Muzan, an urban designer, uh, talks about these kinds of places. When architects go into a place to design, say, a neighborhood, Steve promotes the idea of finding the most loved places, finding them, and then perpetuating the patterns that made those places. And so, if you can imagine living here, um, think again, because it's illegal. It's against the codes. It's against the regulations to build a street like this in most of the jurisdictions around the country. Building setbacks require that buildings be 30 to 50 feet away from the street. Very often that is the case. And when you have 30 to 50 feet of space between the street and the building, what happens is the car gets placed in between the street and the building, and you end up with environments that look like the images that I showed you before. So you think, well, I want my privacy. So, if I live, buildings that close to the street, I want my privacy. So architects, throughout history and, in traditional cities would lift the building off the ground so that people can have privacy. And the street becomes a place instead of just as a means to get from one place to another. This all gets us to the new urbanists who greatly influenced me, and I've heard many engineers say I'm a recovering architect or I'm a recovering engineer. These people deserve a lot of credit. The first new urbanist town is Seaside, Florida, which is the city where the movie Truman, the Truman Show is set. And new urbanism is responsible for raising and shifting the discussion and the practices in architecture and urban design and civil engineering and landscape design toward greening the earth much more than we have been. This is a device. It's called the transect, borrowed from biologists that studied the habitats, different ecosystems where certain animals and plants thrive in different kinds of settings, be they water, fully water, or on the edge of water and land, or up in higher lands and arid properties. So the new urbanists developed this device to identify what kinds of buildings belong in certain ecosystems. So if it's natural, leave it alone. If it's rural and important for farmland, then let it be farmland that's in the rural zone. But buildings need to be built in order to have farms. So you have farm houses. But unlike in Houston, where there are no zoning codes, you might have high rises next to, single family dwellings. But then all of these buildings that are disparately placed, as in T3, the suburban zone, you have these disparate buildings that are isolated, and the infrastructure necessary to get to them just begins to swallow land. And so as we increasingly get to T6 and T7, T7 is, it's just increasingly urban. And I'm not here promoting, the density of New York, but the density of 3 and 4 story buildings is a nice sweet spot. The new urbanists have prompted discussions about the economic viability of places that are more densely populated. And if you think about the tax base of a Walmart, if they pay taxes at all, or have they browbeat the citizens and the power structures in towns to build their Walmarts. Um, the tax revenue from a Walmart doesn't come close to the tax revenue of a mixed use development on the left. And the diagram also shows that the same distance of street um, has to be maintained by the city in taxes. And so if your taxes are increased and not increased, but if they're um, collectively they can sustain the maintenance of the street, but the tax revenue of buildings like these that are disparately located serve way fewer people and don't sustain themselves because the cities can't keep up with the maintenance. New urbanists have changed the ethos of code regulations. They're making place-based codes, form-based codes, and redefining what the authority is that engineers and architects must follow. And and so some would say I've been called actually a communist because of my thinking that we can make compelling places. I used the word compelling in a public forum one time, and somebody in the audience thought that that was making people do one thing or another. That's not what this is about. It's about providing choices for jurisdictions to make places that are walkable, because the codes are telling us what to do and what not to do, and it's not as healthy for us. So the discussion is, all of these words here are relatively new in the last few decades, at least within the span of my career. And I'm not going to go into all of these, but all of them are hugely meaningful and important to the greening of the planet. And, all of them are worthy of our accolades for sure. And only a test of time will make us aware of their best and truest efficacies. So all this is really to say that nature and cities are two sides of the same coin, and the respect for one another, one can't exist and thrive without the other. And so, we don't put walls around our cities anymore for protection, but we have a different enemy to fight. And that is, the threat of a global warming and calamity. So, one second. So architects are looking at different devices and different strategies for making cities more walkable, more enjoyable. This is a term, it's one of those terms on the previous slide, 15-minute city, where everything that you need, can be, doesn't mean you have to live within the boundaries of that, but everything that you need can be found, within a 15-minute walk. Architects in Oklahoma at this organization called Building Culture are building buildings to last hundreds of years, if not centuries. And that is just not a very common practice, but it is a beautiful thing to see architects being able to make a business out of this agenda. And so I can't tell you what you can do. I can tell you what I'm doing. I can tell you how I've been inspired by others who are making a difference. I've been inspired by Environmental Fridays. Thank you, Desmond Murray, and those that have been collaborating in the years that you've been doing this. I just got tapped in when the networking works. Desmond invited me to present, and here I am. It takes collaboration. It takes the dialogue to make change. One of the people that I love and dear on this planet is Lee Levanway. His daughter was in my camp And he came up to me after a camp where the kids presented to their families, and he said, "We have to talk. I'm the director of the Benton Harbor Fruit Market. I've been there for 10 years, and I've been watching the decline of the produce of the Great Fruit Belt. We live in the Great Fruit Belt, and the Benton Harbor Fruit Market is the, I've got to get this right, was the largest of its kind cash to grower produce market in the world." And he watched the decline of it. It's still operating, but most of the food that we produce here in this great fruit belt leaves our state, and so we rarely get to see the local produce. So there's a deep I don't have the time to go into this, but Lee and I tried to start a local food movement where we would have uh, a, a market system that paid local farmers a greater rate for their food, took the liability off of the backs of the local farmers, but the initiative was snuffed out by proponents of a more capitalist-driven system. So for me, there are three things that I want to point out that I think, and I'm borrowing this from Desmond and thanking him at the same time. Make it personal. Decide what you can do within your sphere of influence and your discipline. From my father, I get the phrase "sweep the edges." The rest of the floor will take care of itself. I grew up in a restaurant. Caring for the disenfranchised. This is what I mean. People who are swept to the edges of society, sometimes children, sometimes the elderly, the disabled, caring for the disenfranchised and those on the edges, the poor, caring for them and dealing with the plights that they find themselves in will impact the whole of the world exponentially, I believe. And then mind the spin. Focus on the principles, stay focused on the principles, and the political spin is it's difficult to muddle through. For instance, on the left, we have organizations that do a lot of great initiatives, but there's a lot of great corruption in them. And on the right, I would just simply say, it might be better to popularize the phrase "Make America Green Again." This is a building that I show children, and this is a building that I show children. And I ask them which is a better building. They always say this is a better building. And then I ask them to tell me about this building in this context. And they say that building doesn't fit the context. And I said, so what would you do? And every time they say, we would take it out. It doesn't fit the context. And I asked them, but which is a better building, this one or this one? And they say, oh, this one's a better building. So what would you do? And they say, oh. And so I'm reminded of a quote by Paul Tillich, a theologian. And he said, I hope that there's something very wrong with me, because if there's not, there's something very wrong with the world. And I think there is something very wrong with the world when we think and live in places like, suburbia, the buildings that suburbia has built, which are not sustainable. They're built for say a 25 to 30-year lifespan. A lot of malls are a testament to that as well. And we're armed already to, because of that, to say that building doesn't fit, so we should take it out. That is truly, though, a bank. It is this bank in St. Joseph. This bank fits its context, but it's not that all banks fit in this context, because this is a bank as well. So we have building typologies. and different contexts. So this goes back to the transect to understand which types of buildings fit best in the environments that we find ourselves in. This I borrowed from Dover Cole, a firm out in Florida. I asked children, tell me how to make this a better place. And they always say, add trees, add more buildings, add lights, add crosswalks, add all of these wonderful things to mitigate um, the devastation that having more concrete here than you ever possibly will use, except on the fair day, like if this were Apple Valley, then we would say that the youth fair might fill this parking lot. But I trust that if it didn't, then the neighborhood streets surrounding it could bear the brunt of, an extra traffic for a day or two. But here's what architects are doing and urban designers are doing. They're making places out of parking lots. This is a project that my students worked on, and I was involved in an initiative. Thank you to Princella and Desmond for that initiative, and we will keep pursuing it. But this is a project that my students worked on a couple of years ago. It's called a pocket neighborhood. It's a way of creating a greater sense of community, a little bit greater density, and tying this to agriculture. A recent initiative is to make that community building that you see in the distance a greenhouse, or make the space in between a community garden. And so living more closely, we have a camaraderie, a collective ability to make greater impact in on our planet and on each other. That's a positive impact, that is. And just for the sake of time, it's just going to cycle back through. I will stop that and move to the next slide. In Renaissance Kids, I'm teaching children about urban design. And I got a call one day, and a parent said, "Hey, Mark, I learned from my 8-year-old how to slow the traffic down on a street." And I said, "How's that?" And she said, "Narrow the street." Urban designers are barraged oftentimes with, we need to widen the street, but it's a misnomer. It's a slippery slope toward placelessness. And I mentioned Renaissance Kids here. I'm going to go back a few slides. I want to tell you a little story about this place. Omar was an 8-year-old boy, and I said, "So what do trees give you?" And he said, "Oxygen." And I said, "Omar, I wasn't even thinking about oxygen. I was thinking about shade and beauty." And he said, "Well, you'd better." And it reminded me that the children often know about global warming, or they know about recycling. And Omar was trying to save the planet while I was just trying to save this single street. And so back to here, there's a super great initiative in Benton Harbor. Ashley Hines and the Community Development Corporation. I've been involved with her and the organization for a couple of years, really just maybe a year and a half. They have a community garden and her camp called Outside the Lines. And my camp merged last summer next to the community house, which is being renovated to provide services for the community. We built this pergola with children, and they got their hands dirty. Couldn't be more proud. And then in the spring, my graduate students are designing a kitchen to accompany the garden. So it's a kitchen called the I Can Kitchen, and they're going to be canning and jarring and creating lessons for how to harvest and how to monetize, how do you maybe make a business out of being closer to the earth and growing foods. And during the camp, Kevin Moore often would say, all right, he would pump the kids up every morning. Who can be respectful? I can. Who can do this? I can. Who can treat their neighbor, kindly? I can. And so we have this initiative that's, born out of this experience with children. And so couldn't be more happy and more proud to be involved with such initiatives. Um, so, oh, by the way, our graduate students last year designed pathways in the raised garden beds in order to make it accessible for people in wheelchairs. 90% of time we spend, at least in this country, we're spending 90% of our time indoors. This is according to the EPA. And indoor air quality is not necessarily as good as outside air quality, and something to think about. These are a couple of books that I use in my class this semester. One is just letters between the Chambers for Memory Palaces, letters between two architects. And it's a very easy and important and good read just for creating great places. And I think the more we think about creating great places, the greater the likelihood is that we're going to be more sustainable. And then restorative cities is specifically about being greener as we build places. There are a few initiatives. There's dozens and dozens, and they're cropping up all the time. New podcasts, new organizations. These are four of my favorites. The Green Urbanist podcast, very accessible for anybody who's not trained in architecture. Project for Public Spaces, likewise, all of these are really accessible to anybody. Making Cities Livable conference is, I just came back from Cortona to present at this conference. Cortona is in Italy. My wife and I were presenting on the marriage between Montessori education. She's a Montessori expert. Montessori preparing the environment for learning and creating environments for human flourishing in the urban setting. And the Congress for New Urbanism, that's the cnu.org. The Urban Land Institute had a summit and came up with 10 principles that will resonate with the things I've been talking about this morning. Putting people first, making it personal, Desmond, recognizing the economic value of doing the right thing, empowering champions for health, energize shared space, make healthy choices easy, ensure equitable access, mix it up, embrace unique character of communities, but also cultures and unique character of locales, different locations on the planet, and then promoting access to healthy food and make it active. So again, 90% of our time is spent indoors. Richard Love, this is my next to the last slide. Richard Love wrote the book called The Nature Principle. And he has doctors prescribing nature time for children with ADHD or depression, not just children, people with depression and anxiety and Alzheimer's. He has doctors prescribing nature time for people because it has a healing capacity, and it's something that we should all, after this talk, go out and take a walk, even if it's cold outside. We do not understand the profound effect that architecture has on us, for good or for bad. And I'm reminded of Winston Churchill, who says that we shape our environments and we shape our buildings, and in turn, they shape us. For me, making places and making things active and enjoyable only promotes an interest in making them more sustainable. And, so I'm looking at this Maids of the Mist fountain in St. Joseph and thinking about how, we just posed for this picture. It's not like all these kids gathered around this fountain. to just stand there. So we posed for that picture, but there is a fence around it. It's not engaging like this fountain here. So design places for people. I lied. This is my next to the last slide. Um, our own America the Beautiful says it all. We've forgotten about it, and maybe we should sing it more often.
Hmm.
And lastly, if you want to continue the discussion with me, if you want to collaborate on projects, I am a huge proponent for networking and collaboration. And I think if we're teaching our kids, our kids don't know where their food comes from. Farmers' kids do. So again, this is not about having everybody live in cities. We still need our farmers. But children, I've read a statistic that 30% of kids, I guess, living in cities don't know that bacon is not a plant-based food. Um, and so with that, I will stop my slides and thank you for your attention and open it for questions.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Did you want me to ask a question now, or did you want
Yeah,
to do
you
some?
you could go
You're in
ahead, ask
charge.
questions, make comments.
Okay. I have a couple questions. There's one that's going to need a little bit of context, so bear with me for a second. One of the things you touched on that I thought was really interesting was the interface between sustainable building for the planet and also just for the overall wellness of people. And in my head, I was thinking, well, these things kind of go hand in hand because humans, we have this idea that humans and the earth are like two different things, but we're part of this earth. We're just as much nature as nature is also. Um, but with that being said, one of the, like you touched on, like cars, which create sprawl. And I say this all the time at work. I don't like cars, but cars were an invention designed to make people's lives easier. They help you move from place to place faster. You can go places, which is interesting. And we got there as a way to try to improve the lives of human beings. And as a result, well, you see where we are. You showed us plenty of slides. So then, with that being said, with the LEAD and the Well Building Institute, which seek to, I guess, qualify both of these qualities, I was wondering if you felt like there were instances where bettering the planet is actually in conflict with the betterment of like the human experience, and
Mhm.
if there's a way to mitigate that, or if you just don't feel like that's an issue at all.
I think convenience is one thing,
Mhm.
but it's also convenient that the car industry, the oil industry, and the tire industry bought up the train system that this country had a century ago called the interurban. They bought it up and dismantled it so that we would become dependent on the car. And so convenience is one thing. And I think it's not even lost on me anymore that convenience stores were called convenience stores
Hmm.
Mm.
when it was more convenient just to walk to the edge of the corner to get the goods that you bought at the stores that called convenience stores that you had to drive to.
Hmm.
So I think again with every invention, everything, there's positives and negatives. I can't give up my car, but I would readily give it up if I lived in a walkable environment. And I'm not promoting that cars should be banned. I'm promoting that cars and people walking should coexist or can coexist, and it's been proven throughout history. But the development of architecture has been made as it's called car dependent development.
Hmm.
So we become masters to the car becomes our master,
Hmm.
and then maintenance of the car,
Oh,
Right.
and then the depletion of it's just got so many great things about them, but it's got so many negative things that we're learning about only in the past few decades.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I don't know if that answers your question or touches on it.
well, it does. Well, it does. I was wanting to see if you had more general ideas. I didn't want to focus specifically on cars. That was more of an example. Um, I guess another case, and I don't know because I'm not a climate scientist or anything like that, but I was
I'm
wondering
not
from
either.
yeah, but like on the question for the on the slide where you were talking about the Well Institute, one thing I noticed was like air quality, and I also noticed later on you said that outdoor air is uh,
Not, yeah, no, it doesn't always measure out that way, but indoor air quality can be very unhealthy.
yeah,
Uh,
and I thought it was interesting because in order to like filter our air and to make it, more breathable, I guess, inside indoor environment, we are having to expend energy to do that. And I was like, well, is there ever going to be a point where your lead, whatever your lead status is, conflicts with your well-being institute status because you're trying to target two different things that may conflict with each other. And I don't know if that's actually what happens, but it was just a concept that I had in my head. And I
yeah,
was,
yeah, I think it can happen. I think that's why Weld came into being,
mhm.
because LEED was focused on the planet and and at the probably at the expense of you know, or at least not at the expense necessarily, but to the exclusion. And I don't think that's they weren't focusing on well at all also. So I don't really know. A lot of modern buildings are just largely uninhabitable. Like they have a lot of problems where people don't like working in them. And I think that's not an indictment of LEED. It's an indictment of modernist architecture, per se. But yeah, I mean, everything's a push and a pull. I don't really
Mhm.
have a specific example of to sort of ferret out, your question. I think it's a great question, and those two institutions are working it out themselves.
Mhm.
Mhm. No,
It's also a testament that no one organization or no one set of principles can cover everything.
yeah, it sounds like it's definitely kind of a balancing act. Um,
Mhm.
I just have like one more question before I want to open up the floor to anyone else.
Well, let's open up the floor and
Okay,
then we come back so we could include, more people.
absolutely.
Desmond, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So, Mark, thanks for your presentation. I wasn't here at the very beginning. I have two quick questions for you. How would you evaluate the Andrews campus as a livable space?
Well, thank you for that.
And number
Um,
two, what about how does landscaping and creating livable space affects longevity?
oh my goodness. Landscaping, like we have built an industry around grass. Andrews campus, likewise, Andrews campus could be more livable if they let, the grass go and just built indigenous meadow type plants. But we have this obsession, like with cars, with grass lawns, lawns that we have to throw chemicals on, lawns that we have to mow, and mowers, don't have the same kinds of regulations and protections that cars do. And we have to edge them, and we have to rake the leaves, and we think we have to rake the leaves.
Mm,
And we build new machines to pick up the leaves and blow the leaves. And so Andrews, on one hand, suffers from that. I think Andrews campus is also a wonderful arboretum where you can learn about, plant species. The trees are marked and labeled. There's trails
mm,
that students can walk. Spatially, I would like it to be a little bit tighter, a little more dense, and maybe that'll happen over time. In the time that I've been here in 30 years, 29 years now, there have been places designed on campus for people's flourishing outdoors. One of my students has a proposal to build a a space on campus that is a social hub, a light-filled space, providing light therapy for students with SADS, seasonal affect disorder,
Mm.
and opening it up at night, so that kids have a social place at night to go to that's not just in the dorms. And so it can be better for sure. I would say the biggest indictment I might say is that it's not fully accessible. There are a lot of buildings that don't that exclude the enjoyment of people in wheelchairs. The
Mm.
dorms, for instance, don't have two of the dorms don't have elevators, so students in wheelchairs can't go to chapel because they're on the second floors or at least on a raised level. Um, that question is an important one. But there's efforts being made. I have students right now doing a campus audit for what is accessible and what needs to be most worked on most readily on campus. But then there are discussions like with grounds department, they're asked to shovel the ramps first and the steps second so that everybody can access. But even to Christian's point, that has, it's probably a little more hard to walk up an icy ramp than an icy stair. I don't really know, but everything has a push and a pull. But thank you for your question.
Mhm. Mhm.
You asked two questions. Oh, no, I think, did I answer them?
My other question was, how does landscape affects longevity?
Oh, okay.
Creating living space. How does that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can make, if we build it, they will come. To borrow from that film, that Kevin Costner film, The Field of Dreams. If we build greater landscapes, we will occupy them more and we'll be healthier for it. There was a study done where patients with gallbladders that had just had gallbladder surgery were placed in rooms, either that half of the patients with gallbladder surgery were placed in a room with windows to nature, windows to a park, and half were placed in a recovery room, which was facing a brick wall. And those who were in the presence of nature healed faster. They asked for fewer meds.
Mm.
And they had fewer complaints. So, if we build it, it will be better for everybody.
Mm.
But we have to do it smartly. The answer isn't lawns, it's gardens. And,
Mm.
just being outside. It doesn't even have to include, gardens. We are also building roof gardens that are accessible, which have a lot of multiple advantages, but they're also a lot more expensive to build and trade-offs.
Don't you think, though, that Andrews sort of has a uh some mix, right? We have lots of trees on campus, and then on the edge of campus, we have a river, we have essentially those shrubs that grow wild. Um, so is what would you do? Are there places on campus you would suggest having more shrubs instead of grass? Because I think we
Well,
do
but
some degree of it.
yeah, I think, as we look at the whole of the campus, which includes like I think it's 100 acres. We don't see a large part of
Right,
that, and
right,
maybe the students aren't availing themselves of it. Maybe it's not made people aren't made aware of the
right.
trails and stuff.
The trails.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but I mean, I think if you look at the whole of it, it is a strong blend and mix, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But we can do better. And I don't know if shrubs is the proper term, but
Well, the
but
stuff
just
that's taller than
different.
grass.
Yeah, things taller than grass and shorter than trees. There's a whole mix of plants that fit that category.
Right,
And
right.
this is where we need to bring in Garth Woodruff to if he hasn't already
That's
done it.
true. That is
Yeah,
true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a
have
good
him
one.
do one of these.
That's true. That's very true. Okay, other persons have comments or questions? It seems to me, especially
Bridget raised her hand. I'm
Bridget.
sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Bridget.
Hi. So sorry.
Sorry.
I have two
I have
questions,
two
please. One, I may have stepped away. Did you at all include bridges in architectures?
Roads and bridges. Only in that it gets calculated into the carbon footprint of that 42%.
Okay, all right. And then with reference to accessibility for persons with disability, you know my platform for persons with disability.
Did you just step away? Because I just spoke about that, Bridget.
Yes, I heard
at
that.
least. Oh, okay.
I heard your presentation on that. I'm just thinking that is there any linkage between the blue zones and architectural input?
The blue zones, for everybody's information, is there are cities that have found that more citizens live to be 100 years old and greater, and the common there. I didn't present it here, Bridget, so I apologize. But the common characteristics are that they are walkable places. I think one other commonality is that they are often hilly. So people, get ready exercise as they are outside. And then, low access to local food. And the diets, contribute. There's no single thing that is, can be attributed to the longevity of these people. But the blue zones is organized to go into, in fact, St. Joseph and Benton Harbor, through the Strategic Leadership Council, attempted to engage and to consider becoming a blue zone. And so now it's not that they just happened organically, but they can be made if there's a political and public will. But accessibility is it's one of those unfortunately outlier realities. But more and more people are needing. We have a greater aging population, so accessibility may become more popular as I'm a young baby boomer. The older this generation gets, the more we might pay attention to creating a sense of belonging for everybody.
Absolutely. My final comment just has to do with our campus, Andrews. Perhaps we can be a little more intentional about signage and introducing newcomers to the trails.
I agree with you. Mentioning signing though, I've always said this, and I believe it. If architecture has to depend on the signs to help people understand where they're going, then the architecture is failing in some way.
Interesting. All right. So I think we had Sonia's hand up, and we'll go to Pat after.
Hi, thank you. The presentation was amazing. Lots and lots of information. I first want to start with an invitation. I had forwarded this invite to one of Buchanan's park board members who said that they're doing Thanksgiving for a senior center today, so she was not able to attend. But if anyone on this call would be interested in presenting to our park board members, she invites you to attend their next meeting. A couple of things we've done in Buchanan, which leads to my question, was a community garden, but unfortunately it's not being tended to. So my question is kind of like the chicken and the egg. Are we going with the build it first and then they'll come, kind of like in the Bible, right? Or is it we're waiting on the demand of people that want to walk around? Because in the grand scheme of things, most Americans are just fat, sick, and lazy. And now we do have these conveniences of, Uber and Instacart. And so I know you're saying make it personal, and I'm my brain is racking here. But just as far as, citywide on a grander level, I do look to our civil leaders, if you will, to kind of lead the charge in that. Michigan, while has a beautiful, I think we are blessed as far as our terrain. And, my parents met at a fruit farm, working at a fruit farm in the 70s. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here, right? But we also have kind of a bad reputation for our water. And so kind of my second question is around the architecture of city pipes and those type of materials, if you can comment there.
Well, I'll say this, Sonia, thank you for the question. We have to educate the leaders first. That's super important. We have students in architecture, and you have to find the champions for each of these initiatives, the gardens, the champions on the zoning boards, the champions in civil government. Some of our students in architecture, and this is one of the things that I'm really grateful to, my colleagues over the years who have put together a curriculum that blends architecture and urban design together. And architects around the country, when they lecture here, they say we're only one of 5 universities and architecture schools and universities that are doing this really well. These professions have been segregated. Urban design is separate from landscape. Landscape is separate from interior design, and architecture is somehow separate. My whole education in Texas and at Harvard was primarily about looking at single buildings at a time and trying to make some sort of statement. And it took new urbanism to sort of shake me into an understanding of what I understood intuitively going to Rome for the first time or Europe for the first time. But my school has now produced students who are leaders in their communities with regard to community development, or their city managers, and they're going in and making changes to the codes. The Berrien Orinoco Township codes are now place-based codes, and that was based on initiatives by our urban design studio, and it took educating the leaders. I think that's one of the most important things we could be doing, because that's where you're going to find your champions. It's not you're right. It is not build it and they will come, but when it comes to building public spaces, the infrastructure of the codes has to change 100%. All of the cities that I've ever visited, or that tourists visit because of the city itself, not because of a Disneyland or some attraction, all of the cities that are worth visiting to visit the city understand this, that cities used to be built with a greater understanding of public realm, public space, and because they were built, people come. So I don't mean to say that it's some sort of silver bullet with every aspect of this. You can't just build a garden and they will come if the infrastructure doesn't support that.
So as a follow-up to Sonia's question, and knowing that she's from Buchanan, were you involved, Mark? Because I know your department was involved with creating a plan for Buchanan. I've
Right.
actually seen it.
Yeah.
And Princella, if she's on also.
Yeah, I'm on the call now, and I'm so glad Sonia is on this call. So she started out talking about champions, but she's a champion by just being on this call. My conversations, remember, we were going to move forward on this grant. Sonia is one of those. Her entity, is it One Buchanan now?
Right. Yes.
They were going to be part of our team for this grant. So I've been speaking with her sister, who is the president of this organization. And when we're talking about the gardens, and then we're talking about urban development and what Andrews have been doing or had done a couple years ago, it really falls in place to this blueprint that's been laid out already, and how we can make it work for the city of Buchanan, Michigan. But I think the things that Sonia said and Mark echoed is getting all these people together to talk the same language so we can expedite the growth of Buchanan. We see the growth of the marijuana plants, but in our community, the north side that Sonia could be referring to, and I was referring to in the grant that we were going to write with them as a partner, it's what Sonia's talking about, this area. But it could be Buchanan as a whole. But I think if we could, Mark, have a conversation, a meeting later, so we can talk about bringing all the partners together, and starting with Sonia and this organization they have in Buchanan that's really powerful, and what their initiatives are right now to move the city forward.
Sure. To Sonia's question, I was not involved in that. That was a former colleague, Andrew Van Mauer, in his urban design studio that did that.
Okay.
But I, our school has been involved in a lot of local initiatives, and large and small, that are all worthy, but they're just plans, and every plan needs a champion and a host of people to make them come to fruition.
Mm-hmm. So let's go to Pat. Pat is in Trinidad, so we'll get probably a different perspective here, different question. Pat?
Yeah, just a quick. I was absolutely horrified when you said that beautiful picture of the shaded tree, the trees shading the street was illegal. I thought that was so sad. But I would like to just make a little comment about once we have a kind of small kind of homestead plot, and we plant plants and fruit trees and things like this. And one day I had a technician visiting with his son. This son was about 11 years old. And as they were leaving, he said, "Would you mind if my son picks a Portugal from your tree?" Which is I suppose you all know what a Portugal is. It's a small tangerine type fruit.
Citrus.
And he says, because he's never picked one off a tree. He's only bought it in a market. He lives in Port of Spain, which is a city. And so he had never actually picked a fruit off a tree and eaten it. And so I said, help yourself. But also, if you go to the old cities, I mean, I have spent a lot of time in Edinburgh, and that is planted with gardens and trees, and everywhere it's not just a concrete jungle. And they still, and instead of, they do ban cars, etc., and they do not encourage cars in the center of the city, but they have replaced, actually, they used to have trams going around, and they have now actually gone to considerable expense of bringing the trams back to the city. And in cities in Europe, they did the same, that they did not encourage cars, particularly within the cities. Just one last thing. You really have to think, really have to think in terms also of another buzzword, not a buzzword, but something that people are beginning to realize, which is ecosystem services, which is the value of your ecology and the value of what the combination of plants and animals provide to people. For instance, we have butterfly garden in the Botanic Gardens that we have been working on. It's planted native species to bring back native pollinators. And it's an oasis of quiet and peaceful, peace and quiet. These sort of things are very important in this day and age. Right. I think I had better said enough for just now. My reason for being late in on this call this morning, and I hope to be able to see the rest of the recording, was that I was actually attending a webinar on the effects of coral bleaching in Tobago, which is effects of. So this is what we have to think about, is what is going on and the effects, if we don't do something, how it's going to affect us long term. Right. Enough for me.
Thank
for
you,
now.
Patricia.
Thank you,
Thank you, Patricia. Patricia, that tree, I'm sorry, the tree-lined street saying it's illegal, that caught me off. That's why I put it in there, because it grabs our attention. It's shocking to put it in those terms, but it's a reality. And I thank you for sort of underscoring it. But that's how we have to grab the attention of city officials. I won't name this person, but a city official once told me, when I said, how about if I was inviting my our urban design class to do a study in one of our local towns, and a city manager said, "Why would we want students telling us what to do with our town?" And I thought, these are free ideas for you. These are free and they're wonderful ideas. You don't have to enact them or make them happen. But what I'm just going to say, what a sad statement. And then to your thank you for the ecosystems services. I'll do a search term on that. But it reminded me of a podcast, and I can't remember the name of it, but it talked about reintroducing plant animal life into urbanized areas. And it's not just about like having bat boxes and places for birds to nest, but it's about ground animals and creating places where they can thrive. But the most impactful thing about that was making sure that these ground systems are connected with one another. So they don't have to cross over highways and roads and bridges, to keep life intact and the species intact. So thank you for that.
So I have a couple of questions. One is like really just curiosity from observation, and one is a lot more deeper. The first one is, why are lots of farmhouses painted red? I mean, like, I don't know either, but it's just a curiosity based on that observation. At least in our
Chat
area.
GPT.
Okay. Uh, well, I don't completely trust Chat GPT. I did an experiment on it in the last week and stuff. But anyway.
I've heard the term bull's blood red. It might give us a clue.
Really? Wow.
I've heard the term, but I don't know. I've got to do some searching.
Okay. The more deeper question is, from lots of things that you said and implied, there's an undercurrent, and I wanted to ask this question. How does your faith inform your architectural vision and practice?
Look, the one with God's hand and creating Adam at the Sistine Chapel, like this planet we've been gifted by God, and we are meant to be stewards of this. And so it impacts me in what I do with, I think I'm trying to operate faithfully, that what I'm doing is in God's eyes good things. And I think I'm modeling that for our students and our children, by those things. The thing that I'm hesitating saying is that it is distressing to see to see people who claim to be Christian fighting what seems to be a different agenda, and one that is harming to not just the fabric of the planet, but social fabric. And I think the lessons of God's love are what compelled me to say, reach to the disenfranchised and sweep the edges, because the rest will take care of itself.
Yep, I mean, I know you, we've talked, so I know that, but I wanted it to, for you to express that for the audience as well. Because I think it is really important. It's counter, in a way, it's like a contrast and a counter revolution to what is the status quo, and as you said, a lot of people of quote unquote faith are engaged in things that are really contrary, at least from our understanding, of caring for the planet and caring for people and making that the first priority rather than power, greed, and the rest. I think it's important. to say that. I really like how you then took Make America Green Again. That is pretty cool. Maybe you should put that out there more. I will. Because they know a lot of people are noted for taking good words, like, for example, the word woke. I don't want to go into all the details and then make it something bad. So we could take MAGA and make it something good.
I don't mean to be, so confrontational as to say that, but I see that it made an impact.
Yes, it did.
And my wife cautioned me
No, it's all good, Mark.
about even going there. So I said it in the most diplomatic and caring way that I could.
It's all
good. Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I think, when it comes to being politically correct, that word itself has been vilified as well. And political correctness is just simply speaking in a dignified way that understands who your audience is.
Yeah.
And so that you're not too offending, or that you're not offending at all.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding others' cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think, at the same time, people can become desensitized by those things, but also too sensitive about those things as well. So
a balance.
Yeah. So so those in power are going to. This is where mind the spin matters.
Mm-hmm.
Because the politics of the day is spinning things out of control and out of our reach for making a better planet, a better place. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to really stay focused on each other and the love that we have for one another, and the love that we have for communities, and the love that we have for the planet, and stay focused on those ideas, and maybe sometimes just tune out that other stuff.
Yeah, you're right. Other persons, comments, questions. I see Laurel is on the line, Len, others. I do actually have another question if nobody else did. It's to get your thoughts on the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. In fact, it's coming up here soon. It says the 8th of December would be the reopening. Have you paid attention to it in terms of the fire?
Only tangentially, but I presented at the International Making Cities Livable conference a couple of years ago in Paris. So I saw the building without the roof, and it's sobering. Now, I think back in 1994, I was teaching at Texas A&M, and I was at a sustainability conference at Texas A&M. And one of the things that came up, and they were talking about all kinds of gizmo green kind of stuff, all these devices and new technologies. And somebody said, well, what about Rome? And it was the final question of the day. And he said, it's sustainable. It's been here for thousands of years. And places like Rome, Paris, all of these cities, throughout the world that have been around for so long, and sustain themselves, we are richer for their examples. And Notre Dame, I think I know many builders that would say, if the roof went away like that, just tear the building down. But I'm really grateful that the city, took or whoever was in charge of making that. It's not just a symbol, but it's a testament that buildings that were built hundreds and hundreds of years ago are worth renovating and fixing and giving. Sometimes there's a term called adaptive reuse that purports that the most sustainable building is the one that's already built. And I've been in countless discussions with builders who would say, just tear it down. Because it's easier for the builders to start with a clean slate. Mm-hmm. And it can be more expensive to retrofit and to fix the problems that you find underneath the floors and beneath the behind the ceilings and behind the walls. once you get in and start digging to renovate something. But but the infrastructure of what's already been built, has an embodied energy that we need to respect and think twice before we tear it down.
Yeah, yeah. Laurel, are you still online? You could unmute and make your statement.
Yes, I'm recovering from cooking.
I'm recovering from eating.
Yeah, that too.
Okay.
So I just said I love the vision to make Benton Harbor a blue zone. I believe that is attainable. And I think, instead of always looking at problems, looking at assets and the potential to get there is wonderful. So I really appreciate when you talked about that in efforts. And if it's not one effort, there's always another, that can step in and breathe life.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I'm thankful to be here. So I didn't. Dinner was very, very interesting last night. We had a Friendsgiving, but nobody had a chance to say thank you for anything because I think the food was really good. But
Okay. Well, yeah,
but
I think the idea that you have here of, maybe going back again to that vision of Benton Harbor being a blue zone, because there's so many elements already in place, right? The lake, the river, Popo River. It's not completely urbanized. And what Mark was talking about with the fruit farm, I mean, those are different elements that, with the vision and the work, it could restore Benton Harbor to that sort of, community. Are these dead? Are these ideas dead or just
No,
no?
not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
I think more and more people are living in cities than ever before in the history of humanity. And that's, in the last couple of decades that we've peaked that. And so, there's only movement forward, Desmond. I think there's so many initiatives, and so there's a lot of great concern about global warming. We just got to find the sweet spot for making it happen.
Right. Yeah.
We have to be realistic also that, really the industries that have hold of the more polluting efforts or the more polluting elements of of the planet, there's they've got power. And until fossil fuels are depleted, I think that fight's going to be real.
So, Christian, do you have your original question still, or you have other questions? And we could probably get those from you and maybe do a wrap up here pretty soon.
I actually think my questions were answered.
Okay.
The other question.
Okay.
If I may just ask Dr. Moreno,
Yes.
if buildings that he put an illegal stamp on, where did is that? Because I think I live there.
Yeah.
Is that in
Wait,
Massachusetts? I live in
what was
Dorset.
the question?
I'm just wondering where was your picture taken? The picture that you put up the stamp of illegality.
Oh, I really don't know. I Googled
It's
Tree
in
Line
Mass.
Street or something.
Yeah.
I will find it and I will let you know.
That's Dorchester. That's where I
Is
live.
it? Is it?
Boston.
I thought it could be Boston. It could be
It's
somewhere in
Boston.
Chicago.
I
I thought it
something
could be
like that in
Boston.
Chicago. I thought I saw something.
Dorchester, South Boston.
Right.
Those are very familiar. We walk through those streets. The trees are all undergrowth, and the concrete blocks are very uneven because they're over trees that are still standing.
Bridget, from my walk from the Graduate School of Architecture at Harvard was down a street called Kirkland, and I walked on that street thinking about all of the, the people that have walked that street
Yeah.
before, throughout history, right? And the street, it was a brick sidewalk, and
Undulating.
the paving, it was undulating, and the roots of the trees were
Yeah.
heaving, and this and that. And I thought, you know what? I've never walked on the other side of the street. And I looked across the street, and there was a concrete, straight, perfectly manicured sidewalk. And I thought, I owe it to myself to do it, to walk over there. I'm sure I got home faster, but it wasn't as enjoyable or
It's
rich.
not as it's really wonderful. I live on the street with the oldest house in Dorchester.
But those streets aren't wheelchair friendly either. So there's that.
No. But it's also cozy. It's also historic. It just gives you the feeling that others are present. So
Yep.
Just that.
I saw Sonia's hand. Sonia, you still got your question or comment?
Yes, I didn't want to be remiss in thanking Christian also for being here with us. I understand he's in the Atlanta area. I was just there a couple of weeks ago visiting my son, who's now 30, and I'm trying to get married off. And if he could just describe briefly what the Beltline in Atlanta is like. Thank you for the work that you're doing at Georgia Tech. That's obviously very needed, especially for first-year students. That's amazing. So let me say thank you for that. But my son and I, we went and got foot massages, and then we went and got some appetizers at a local restaurant. This is one of those mixed-use areas. It was a very natural thing to walk in the front door, have a bite to eat, and walk out the back door, and we just walked off what we had just eaten. This Beltline, and Kristen, you're probably better at describing this for me, but there were skaters, cyclists, walkers, joggers. Mind you, this is 6 p.m. It gets dark at 6 p.m. Beautiful wells, street lights, mixed use, businesses, apartments, street. It was gorgeous. And I just thought, what a natural way of living. And I told him he needs to find his wife out there.
I actually am working on a project for the Beltline right now. We're working on a bridge that's going to go over a pretty big part to kind of extend the trail on there. Yeah, the Beltline's really cool. I think it was built over a pre-existing like a railroad path, which is why it kind of has that natural way of going through the city. And so there's a lot of development that's happening on the side of that. And as the Beltline continues to grow, more and more things to do are going to pop up on the site. It is a really nice walk. I used to go there quite a bit. And you're right, it's so full of life. There's always just like I said, cyclists, people doing music, people just walking, talking. There's a lot of cool places where you can stop and you can like look over like a bridge and look off into the city and see all the urbanism that's going on there. I enjoy the Beltline a lot. I think it's great. I'm excited to see it develop more because it's kind of a living and breathing thing right now that continues to get bigger and more interesting as time goes on.
My former chair, Lionel Johnson, lives in Atlanta, and he taught the fourth year design studio called Integrative Design and Comprehensive Design, and they were designing on the Beltway in Georgia. The linkage between that, a building and its context is so important to get right, that architects are really just figuring it out again.
Okay, so we went a little bit longer because I don't have any classes coming up and stuff today. If there are no other comments or questions, thank you so very much, Mark. Thank you so very much, Christian. And yeah, I think I'm going to follow up with that lead that you told me about in agriculture. What's his name again?
Garth Woodruff.
Yeah, Garth. That would be a good lecture. So we'll think about that. But we want to thank everyone for your comments, your questions, for your attendance, and hope that this weekend continues to be a weekend of Thanksgiving for all of us. And if it's Friday, it's Environmental Fridays. It is personal. We will see you back here next week, Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Don't go crazy with Black Friday. That's a crazy thing. I don't know.
Sonia, do you have my email address? You can call
I
me or
did.
email me.
Yes, and Moreno, I sure will.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you for the invite.
You got it.
Thanks, everybody.
Take
Take
care.
care. Thank
Have a
you.
good weekend, everyone.
All right. Take
Thank you
care.
so much. This is
All right.
just a great presentation. Totally for life.
Okay. Thank you.